Good morning. Welcome to our study of the Upper Room Discourse, and we will be looking at chapters 13, 14, 15, 16 over the next several weeks, but we want to include 17 in that. It's actually the end of the Upper Room Discourse. The whole thing is contained. And I want to make some quick observations back to the previous talks on the fourth gospel that we have on video so far, John 1 through 9. Now, in that series, I have observed that the writer structures his gospel with 7 signs. And those 7 signs are the wedding at Cana, the healing of the nobleman's son, the healing of the man at the pool, the healing of the man born blind, the feeding of the 5,000, the healing of the man born blind, and the raising of Lazarus. And that the 7th sign is the crucifixion, that all the signs are pointing to that. And that's why the writer uses the term semeia rather than dunamis, which is often translated as miracle or power in the Synoptic Gospels. For this writer, Jesus' miracles, as they are, have a significance beyond themselves. It's not simply about healing others. They point beyond. They point to something else. They point to a deeper reality. And that reality is the crucifixion, the crucified God. And we want to keep that in mind. Furthermore, I observed, and to my knowledge, this is my observation, it's a bit of original work, that the 7 signs are structured in a chiastic manner, C-H-I-A-S-T-I-C. You can look that up. It's a literary term, and it means that a sequence will go A, B, C, C, B, A. That is, the A and the A prime, as it's called, repeat the theme. The B and the B prime repeat their theme, and the C and the C prime repeat their thing. And just for fun, here in this group, when we're finished with this talk, I'll put up as a post the work I've done in 1 John to show how that is chiastically structured. The whole letter is, and you can see that. And chiasmus is a literary form used all over the Bible, and particularly the New Testament. It's an excellent form to use for memorization. And a simple way to understand chiasmus is the saying, don't cast your pearls before swine, nor throw holy things before the dogs. So the A is with reference to the pigs, the B is with reference to dogs. But then the B comes in, lest they turn and rend you, and then the A comes in, or trample them under your feet. A, B, B prime, A prime. And you can have highly structured chiasmus that go A, B, C, D, E, F, E, D, C, B, A, you know. And the center of the chiasmus is always important. And the center of the chiasmus in the Gospel of John is the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, the sign, I should say, the sign of the feeding of the 5,000. And we've observed in these previous talks the numerous Eucharistic and baptismal overtones. We'll see tonight the theme of water again plays an important role, just as it did in John chapter 1 with the baptism, John chapter 3, you must be born of water and the Spirit, John chapter 4, the woman at the well, the man at the pool, in John chapter 5, there's all these allusions to water. And of course, scholars, particularly the Catholic scholars, are keen to ferret out all the Eucharistic and baptismal or sacramental themes in this gospel to understand how this writer understood these important rituals of the Christian faith. At any rate, we have a chiastic structure in the Upper Room Discourse as well, and that's to be expected. It is, if you say to me, Michael, does this go back to the historical Jesus? Well, of course not much. You can't say that there's a whole lot that you can like trace back to the historical Jesus in chunk form, but like the Synoptics, it's certainly possible to see a lot of what's happening in this text as it's being midrashed on by this writer, his certain things that are happening that that so-called the historical Jesus, as it were, could or would have said this particular night. And C.H. Dodd's book, The Historical Tradition in the Fourth Gospel, is very important for this, as is Johnny T. Robinson's book on the Fourth Gospel. At any rate, we want to begin with chapter 13, and we're going to notice immediately that this writer is taking a different tack than the synoptic writers. And what's important for us to recall right now is that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels, the way it works is Jesus has the preparations for Passover meal made, which is Thursday night. Our Thursday night. Remember, it's their Friday morning because their day begins at sunset. The Jewish day begins at sunset. So when I say Thursday night, it's important for you to think in Jewish ways that it's the beginning of Friday, okay, when the sun sets. So it's our Thursday night, it's their Friday morning. That's how that works. Now, the Passover is to be celebrated on Nisan 14. That would be Thursday night, and into Friday is the Passover day, okay? But our gospel writer is going to give us a couple of indications that this last meal is not a Passover meal. That does not mean that because of its proximity, that is the night before the actual Passover meal, that it doesn't perhaps carry Passover connotations, but our writer is going to make a case that this actual meal is not a Passover meal. Now, you might run into trouble at this particular point if you're locked into the thesis of Jeremias and others that in fact the Last Supper was a Passover meal. But it's certainly possible to make an excellent case that the early Jewish Christian community has in fact pushed ahead by one day the death of Jesus, or rather I should say they have him celebrating the Passover meal. Okay, so that's the problem of the synoptics. In this gospel, Jesus does not celebrate the Passover, and this is made particularly clear in John 18:28, where after his trial before the Jewish authorities, he's brought to Pilate early in the morning, and he's going to be crucified that day. And in John 18:20, it says the Pharisees didn't want to enter into Pilate's space because they didn't want to end up getting ritually defiled, so that they could not slaughter their lambs later that afternoon and then the next day, that is the Thursday night, eat their Passover. So this calendrical difference is perhaps the hugest in early Christianity. It has certainly affected the split between the Orthodox and the Catholics in their celebration of when Easter and Holy Good Friday are to fall, and that's why we have different Easter and Good Friday celebrations fairly often between the East and the West, because one is following the Johannine chronology and the West follows the Synoptic. Now, 13:1. Before the festival of the Passover. So there's your first clue, and then John 18:28, your second clue. We're dealing with a meal here, or a time, I should say. We're dealing with a time frame that's prior to the Passover meal. And it says, now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus, and then you have, I'm going to read the rest of the text. You have, knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table. The subject, Jesus, is separated by all that text I read from the verb, got up. If we were to eliminate that, it would be, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus got up from the table, girded himself, took off his robe, girded himself. But the author's going to set us up here at the beginning of this discourse with the themes of the discourse. And they're all put right here as we see Jesus getting ready to stand up and disrobe. So what is it that is happening in this moment for this writer? First, Jesus knew that his hour had come. Now the word hour, ora in Greek, he ora, is a technical term in the Gospel of John, and as you read through this Gospel, you will frequently find Jesus referring to his hour, or his day, okay, or his time. Well, in John chapter 2, when Mary says to Jesus, can you change, they've got no wine, and he says, my time has not yet come. And he will say, my hour has not yet come, okay? This is all with reference to the cross. the word hour, my hour has not yet come, my time has not yet come, is with reference to the cross. This is a cross-centered text in every way. We've seen that over and over again throughout this gospel. So that's the first thing. Jesus knew his hour had come. Now, those that remember the prologue, if you're reading a gospel through, you're gonna have all these allusions previous to this to Jesus' hour and Jesus' time. For example, in the previous chapter, when it says the Greeks wanted to see Jesus, and Jesus says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And of course, glorify, the verb doxazo, is a Johannine doppelganger, a double word meaning. And it doesn't mean to glorify as in to magnify. It means to glorify as an ultimate abasement on the cross. And the verb hupsao, to raise up, to exalt, is the same thing. Again, cross-centered. Okay, this whole gospel is, its language, its vocabulary is all connected to the crucifixion. So first, Jesus knows his to depart, to go away from this world to his Father. That's the first thing. Then the second participle is having loved his own in the world. And then you have he loved them eis telos, to the very end. Now again, telos is going to come up again in its verbal perfect form in John 19, tetelestai, it is finished. And so again, we're reminded of the way this writer is going to be using terms. He loved his own eis telos, to the end, to the finish. You could say there's this movement toward completion here of utter love. And again, we are pointed to the cross. So far we're pointed to the cross with reference to the hour has come, the departure from the world. We're pointed to the cross with he loved his own to the end, to the tetelestai, to the it is finished, to the very end. And then we're going to be brought into how this mechanism is going to be operating, because not only does Jesus know his hour has come, not only has Jesus loved his disciples to the end, but also the devil has placed it into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus. These are the, so far, three things that are kind of, if you want to think of it this way, it's a metaphor, that are kind of there in Jesus' head as he's standing up, and Jesus stood up. So these are the things that the writer's contexting for you to give you this scene. There's this scene here that he's creating. And also knowing that everything had been given to him by the Father into his hands, and that he had come from God, and that he was going to God. This is also part of this, that he has full authority, the full authority of the Father. Well, we've seen this earlier in the text, John 8, for example, John chapter 5, where Jesus is talking about his relationship with the Father in these texts. And now this is brought into Jesus' self-consciousness, as it were, as he's preparing to stand up. So we know at this point that Jesus knows his hour has come. He's going to love his own all the way to the end. Judas is preparing to betray him. Now there's the battle between the Jesus and the Satan. Everything's been given into his hand. He has all authority. And he's come from the Father, and he's going to the Father. So then he rises from the table. And now comes the act that we know is the foot washing. What's really key here is that when we get down later on into verse 15, he's going to use the term hupodegma. I have given you an example, a pattern, a paradigm. Okay? Again, what we have tended to do with this is we have understood this example, this pattern, this paradigm is something we copy. And so we have this Thursday evening foot washing service that we do on Holy Thursday, and it's just utterly fake. Why? Because it has no connection to the cross. You see, we go, oh, we're going to serve each other, and this is how we're going to serve each other, and we get up and people in church, they do their weepy thing, or and they wash each other's feet, or however it works, and they're serving each other, and then now this is going to give them a servant mindset, and it's missing everything that's happening here with regard to the connection of this act with the cross. Once you bring the cross into this act, you very clearly define the kind of behavior patterns that Jesus is referring to as a hypodeigma. And it is not the actual act of foot washing that's the hypodeigma. It's what it points to, this crucifixion. And the response of this victim. That's what this is all about. You see, in the fourth gospel, Jesus is not a classic victim. And this is really hard for people to wrap their minds around. But he does say in this particular gospel, no one takes my life from me. No one takes my life from me. I lay it down by my own choice. And we don't like to talk about victimage this way because our experience of victimage tends to be particularly nuanced these days by Michel Foucault and all the language of power. And really in that model, in that paradigm, there are only two types of victims. There's the victim of myth, the persecuting community creates, and then there's the victim of retribution, the voice of Abel. There's really only two kinds of victims in the worldview. This third kind of victim, this third reality, this third way to understand suffering, this third way to bring God into the world, this is foreign to them. Okay, but this is not foreign to Jesus. This is who the Father is, the one who is self-giving. So this hypodeigma, this act now, Jesus is going to stand up, he's going to ungird himself, he's going to flip roles, okay? Because in the interpretation of the text, he's going to say, if I, your teacher and Lord, you call me teacher and Lord, and if I'm going to do this and act as your servant, then thus you're going to do to each other. Now, the disciples aren't going to get this any more than modern Christians do, okay, or medieval Christians or Reformation or any other, but the text itself is pushing us to consider something here. So it is important at this particular point to note that after Jesus girds himself and takes the basin of water, and he begins to wash the feet of the disciples, and he ends up coming to Peter, and Peter asks him this question. He says, Lord, you going to wash my feet? And Jesus says to him, what I'm doing, you don't get this. I know you don't get this. And this is really key here, because if you think you get this, you don't get this. Because until you're like Peter and you understand what's happening here, I'm sorry, until you're like Peter and you don't understand what's happening here, it's hard for the insight of the text to push through. As long as you think you understand what's going on, you don't. So the first thing to do is to go, what's going on here? What's really happening here? Do we simply have power roles reversed? Is that all Jesus is saying? Is if you have power, give up power? Is that what he's saying? Is that all this is? Is it, treat each other and you be the slave to everybody? Is that what he's saying here? Is that what this is all about? And it's easy to read the text this way because, again, people don't connect the act of foot washing with the crucifixion. It's a hypodeigma. It functions as a semeia. It's a sign. And we get this, of course, because it's laden with water language, baptismal language about washing and these kinds of things. But Peter says, the way it works is, Jesus says, what I'm doing now, you're not going to get, but you'll know after these things. And Peter says to Jesus, you will never wash my feet. That is, these roles will never be reversed. I'm where I'm at, you're where you're at, you're going to stay where you're at, and you're never going to wash my feet. That's just not going to happen. And so it is that Jesus turns to him and he says, look, unless I wash you, you can't have a part of me. Simon says to him, well, fine. Please, I've got to be a part of you. I can't not be a part of you. Wash my hands, wash my head, wash whatever you got to wash, man. And Jesus says, one who's bathed does not need to wash except for the feet. And then he's entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you. And then, of course, he's referring to Judas. What is Jesus doing here? If, in fact, we're dealing with baptismal allusions, and I think we are, the argument of the text is, look, when you're washed, when you experience baptism, your sins are forgiven. And from that point on, sin in your life is kind of like getting your feet dirty. You walk around through life, you get your feet dirty, you need that forgiveness. Just there, now you're clean. It's not, and again, if you're kind of a finished works of Christ person and all this and that and the other, you're missing the point if you think, well, no, man, my sins are all forgiven. But yes, they are. Yes, they are. But existentially, in life, it's important to acknowledge when we sin. And I'm going to leave that generic for now. We'll define that in a moment. And to have our feet washed, to be forgiven, to know that forgiveness is a daily event, okay? Forgiveness, because let's face it, very few people are going to get through the day without hurting someone or themselves. Okay? No. So Peter's argument is, look, man, you got to clean me. Jesus, you've been baptized. Scholars haven't pointed this out, and I'm just making an observation because I'm not quite sure. I'm wondering sometimes with regard to this text if Jesus isn't referring back to John the Baptist's baptism. You've all been baptized in John's baptism. There's your starting point. Now I'm just going to wash your feet because the whole point of being baptized there was for the forgiveness of sins. I don't know if it's referring to Christian baptism or John the Baptist's baptism, but it's referring to baptism. This much I do know. And the argument is that you're forgiven, but there's that forgiveness that has to happen each day, that foot washing that has to happen by Jesus. And Peter doesn't want this. That's a reversal of roles for him. He's expecting a strong, powerful figure. We know this. We'll certainly see it later in this gospel when he draws his sword in Gethsemane. We are left at this point with a Jesus who's absolutely mind-boggling. Because when he's finished, he says, after he says, one of you is not clean, he knew who was to betray him. And for this reason, he said, not all of you are clean. And now we have to talk about Judas. Judas is an important figure in the gospel tradition. He's been really misunderstood. There was all the brouhaha about the gospel of Judas a few years ago, and I'm just going to set your mind at ease right now. They're not going to discover any more gospels out there in the desert or anything else that's going to give you some kind of access to the historical Jesus that you didn't have before. I just don't see it happening. And if they do, then they'll debate about it like they have the Gospel of Thomas. Okay, sorry for that little aside. Now we're going to move into betrayal. And following betrayal, we're going to move into the troubling element here of what Jesus is going to experience as a stirring of the waters in his spirit. Same verb that's used in John 4, the textual variant with regard to the fella at the pool saying, I got to wait till an angel stirs the waters. It's a stirring up. And this writer's going to use this verb, and we'll get there in a minute. But before we do that, I want to read you a little bit from an excellent commentary. If you're not familiar with this book, Courting Betrayal, Jesus' Victim in the Gospel of John by Helen C. Orchard. I'll let you look at that for a moment so you can write it down. Courting Betrayal, Helen C. Orchard. It's a phenomenal piece of work. I mean, it's a phenomenal piece of work. But when we get to the upper room discourse, our tendency is to want to go, it's full of all this devotional stuff. It's really full of stuff about betrayal and suffering. That's what it's full of. That's why it has all the comforting stuff. But we want to ignore the betrayal stuff. We want to ignore the suffering stuff. We want to ignore all the stuff related to that and just, in my Father's house are many mansions and there are blah, blah, blah. No, this is all in the light of what's going to be happening here. So here's how Helen Orchard describes this. It's beautiful. She says, the scene is in fact a very tense one. Both Jesus and the disciples display anxiety in their words. The preceding events have no doubt contributed to this uneasy atmosphere. From the disciples' point of view, Jesus had just carried out an unexpected and shocking act by washing their feet, had a serious disagreement with Peter, accused one of them of being a betrayer, told them he is leaving them, and finished off with further bitter words to Peter, scorning his fealty. From Jesus' point of view, he has attempted to carry out an act of service to his disciples, which has humiliated him. And all the more so because it was misinterpreted and resulted in conflict. How about that? Jesus did something, the disciples misinterpreted it, and it led to conflict. Oh, oops. Okay, carry on. Here's Helen. He had to bear the presence of the one who's about to betray him, enduring great distress as he identifies the culprit and sends him out to complete his task. Following Judas's departure, Jesus has to tell those closest to him that he will be taken from them, but has been interrupted by Peter, who, with his shallow promises, has revealed an utter lack of comprehension about the situation. Indeed, we can surmise the atmosphere is extremely tense. We have to keep that in mind. Okay? You do not have gentle Jesus, meek and mild, just sitting there dispensing platitudes at the Last Supper. There's a term that's used for this. I'll use it. I don't mind. Colorful will be colorful. But I think Jesus comes to this evening, and it starts out as a giant clusterfuck. That's a military term. It just means everything's screwed up. Okay, this is it. This is where everything now is going to happen. All the pieces are in place, and it's not pretty. And Jesus knows his hour has come. This is it. Now, please recall, there are two seats of honor at any given feast. You have the guest of honor, that's going to be Jesus. And you have the person on the right and the person on the left. Those are seats of honor. And the very fact that the disciples, they have no idea who's going to betray Jesus. None whatsoever. They're not all going, we know Judas is bad. Oh, we don't know. For in their eyes, Judas is being honored that night. He has a seat of honor there. When the writer juxtaposes the two seats, on the one side he has the disciple whom Jesus loved. And on the other side is Judas, who would have been, from all outward appearances, completely devoted to Jesus. So devoted that, remember, he's a zealot. He's a Sicarii. He's an assassin. And this is how devoted he is, what his zeal is like. He's completely and utterly devoted to Jesus. The disciples know this, He's got that seat of honor alongside the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and then Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. They're not thinking in their minds, oh, we know it's Judas. No, they don't know this. They're clueless. They think it might be them. They're all worried. This is how good Judas is able to project himself. You might meet your Judas someday. Your best student, your best friend, the person who wants to be most like you, the person who admires you the most. It's usually that type of person. That's the type of person that becomes your Judas, because you become a rival to them. And when you become a rival to them, in this case, Judas had a vision of who Jesus was going to be. And when Jesus stripped off his clothes and took the position of the servant that would wash feet, and by the way, this is not a male role at all. It's a female role. The foot washing is, okay? And if you think hierarchically the way they did in terms of patriarchy, Jesus is really humiliating himself. He's not humbling himself, he's humiliating himself. And that's it for Judas. That's it. This is not who his Lord is. And a Jesus that does this is certainly not going to start a holy war. There's something utterly wrong with all of this. And so it is when Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. Peter, who's sitting next to the beloved disciple, says, do you mind asking him, who it is, please? Who is it? Please, we got to know. And Jesus doesn't tell the group. He simply whispers to the beloved disciple, the one who I hand the bread dipped into the sop to. And so everybody sees Jesus just dipping and then handing the bread over. Judas takes it. And the beloved disciple knows who it is. And now what's interesting at this point, again, is the incomprehension of the disciples. And let's look at this. He says, verse 21 and following, he says, some thought that because Judas had the common purse, Jesus was telling him, that is when Jesus said, what you got to do quickly. Some thought Jesus had the common purse, and they thought he was being sent out to buy stuff for the feast. Remember, this meal is not the Passover. The feast is the next night, technically. Or to give something to the poor. Well, that's what you would do. That's what Jesus would do, and perhaps they've seen him do this before, at festival times, to go out and give alms to the poor. They think that's what Judas is going to be doing. Okay, Jesus is sending him on an errand. They have no clue about what's to happen. And that's why it's really important for us to recognize when we perceive Judas at this point, in historically speaking, he hasn't done anything to indicate that he's the betrayer. That he's perceived as one of the most zealous of the disciples. He's given a place of honor at this last meal, where he utterly shows his dishonor. Okay, now let's come back to the beginning of the text. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas to betray Jesus, and then the moment that Jesus has taken the piece of bread, he gives it to Judas. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. This is going to tell you something about the sacramental theology here of this writer. First of all, were Judas's feet washed as part of this process? Yes. Did it affect him? No. Did Judas share in this Eucharistic practice? Yes. What did it do for him? Confirmed him in the darkest side of himself. It's this kind of logic Paul's talking about when he comes in 1 Corinthians. It says, when you eat this meal, you're eating and drinking blessing or damnation to yourself, but you're bringing one of those two things in. That's how this meal operates. That's what it does. It cleaves. And that's why it's so important when we come to this meal to recognize what we're doing. And if we come to this meal as though it's some kind of little sacramental thing that makes us right with God, but we can go out and do as we please with our neighbor, this writer would tell you, no. There's no magic here, as it were, in this. Because Judas refused to relate any of this to Jesus' death, baptism, Eucharist, or foot washing, in that sense, I'm saying. Okay. There is now the betrayal theme continued in chapter 17. Okay, once Judas has left, we really don't have any conversation about the betrayer until chapter 17, when Jesus says, I've kept those you give me except for the son of perdition, the one who's destined for this. And this raises troubling questions for Christians. Did God predestine Judas to be the betrayer? Is Judas stuck forever being buried upside down in Dante's hell? How do we understand the Judas figure in the Gospel of John? Is Judas functioning as a scapegoat for this writer? Okay? I think it can be said that perhaps for early Jerusalem Christianity, Judas was perceived as the scapegoat. After they would replace him with Matthias, or during that process, I think he's certainly perceived as the bad guy. And he does make it into the lists of the apostles in the Synoptic Gospels. He's certainly recognized here as a valued figure. He's at this place of honor at this meal. But is Judas functioning as a scapegoat? In Christianity, I think Judas is, in a sense, the first scapegoat upon which the Christian religion is built. I think Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5 are scapegoats that the Jerusalem church is built upon, and we've just continued this religious process in Christianity precisely because we failed to reckon with this gospel and understanding what's really happening here. But is Judas, how do we see Judas? Well, we've got him in chapter 13, we've got him in chapter 17. Now I'm going to follow Peter F. Ellis, and I'm going to just note this for you. When Stephanus came along and put chapter and verse in here in the 17th century, before that there's no chapters or verses, oftentimes the chapter verse divisions are a bit odd. So like Genesis 1:1 through 2:3 is the first creation narrative, and Genesis 2:4 begins the second creation narrative, rather than carrying the first creation narrative all the way down through 2:3 and starting Genesis chapter 2 with verse 4. But these are all arbitrary divisions in the Bible, chapters and verses, okay? Oddly enough, these chapter divisions are actually quite well done. Chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, they really were put in at the right places. And so you can juxtapose chapter 13 and chapter 17, and they both have numerous themes in common, but they both have Judas the betrayer in there. So the betrayal at the beginning, so let's see, this in chapter 13 continues on in 17, which will lead us to 18 and the passion narrative in the garden. And the verbs, nouns, or themes that we find in both John 13 and John 17 include phrases about his hour, about love, about the mission of the impossibles, and glorification. These four themes plus the Judas theme, which I've added. Now, there's your two A's. A, John 13, John 17, A prime. Now your two B's are going to be chapter 13 through chapters 13 and 14 on the one hand, and chapter 16 on the other. That's your B prime. So A, John 13, 1 to 32, chapter 13. B, chapters 13:33 to 14:31. Okay, so chapter 14 in essence, with a few verses of chapter 13. And your other B prime on that is John 15:26 and chapter 16. The middle section is John 15, 1 through 25. But the B primes, the B and the B prime, chapters 14 essentially and chapters 16, both have the words and phrases about Jesus going away, the sending of the counselor, asking in his name, and the gift of peace. And there are other verbs that are repeated in all of these. And then the center section is John 15, 1 through 25. That's the heart of the discourse. And here we're going to talk about the true and the false vine and how disciples must remain in Jesus. And I'm taking this chiastic structure from Peter F. Ellis, The Genius of John. Peter F. Ellis. That there is a structure to this, scholars note. I'm always looking for chiasmus first thing whenever I look for a text, because it is really quite dominant as a literary device. And I think Ellis is correct in seeing that. And the nice thing about Ellis's ABC, with John 15 in the middle and then BA, so 13, 14, 15 is the middle, 16, 17, is that your B's and your C, the middle center sections, all have references to the Holy Spirit, the Paraclete that's to come, because the Paraclete, the whole thing that's being shaped around this is this coming of Jesus again and the coming of the Paraclete. And where this all happens, and as we're going to find out, it all happens on the cross. Pentecost is on the cross, the Ascension's on the cross, it's all happening on the cross. Okay, this is this Johannine writer's vision. It's not that you have the crucifixion, then the resurrection, and then the ascension, and then the outpouring of the Spirit. No, the whole revelation, the whole bang and caboodle, even the ascension of Jesus to the right hand of God is occurring on the cross. Even the outpouring of the Holy Spirit is occurring on the cross. That's this writer's perspective. So we have this betrayal motif starting us off with this extraordinary act of Jesus, who is seeking to show that there's a pattern of the way they're going to relate to one another. And so far we haven't defined this relationship, but it will now get defined. So after receiving the piece of bread, Judas leaves. And the writer says, and it was nuktos, it was night. And again, night is a Johannine double meaning term. It can refer both to physical night, as in dark skies and stars and this kind of thing, but it can also refer to a deeper night, the darkness of the spirit world in that sense. It was night. There's that dark time. It's dark time. When he'd gone out, Jesus said, now. And again, another important word in Johannine vocabulary is the word now. My hour is not yet come, but now you get to this now. Now, the Son of Man, the true human, has been glorified. And God is glorified in him. And if God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. All of this glory language, this doxazo term, again, refers not to Jesus being magnified by God, not to Jesus being vindicated by God, none of that. Doxazo is used with reference to the cross. God, when Jesus says God is going to be glorified in him, you might as well translate this as God is going to be humiliated in him, and but because for this writer, it's this act of humiliation that Jesus does as this hypodegma, as a sign. It's the going to the being stripped again and going to the cross. That's the act of service. And what is happening on the cross is the forgiveness of sin. And this writer sees that as the ultimate glory of God. It is God's most glorious, forgiving the human species from the cross. This is utterly different, beginning with the presupposition that God is majestic and God is almighty, like we do in the Western tradition, the Calvinistic tradition, the charismatic tradition. We start off with how great God is, how powerful God is, how all-knowing God is, and all this. No. The ultimate glorification of God for this writer is to bear witness to the crucified Jesus. And that is the most difficult thing in the world for the world to do, or for Christians to do, because what's happening here on the cross is that there is a creation that's being completed, and that act of creation includes the forgiveness of all. And that means washing feet every day. Now watch this. He says, little children a little longer. And that's very Johannine language, teknia, little children. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. But I give you a new commandment. Now, Raymond Brown and others have pointed out at this point with this phrase, kaine, new, we're dealing here with covenantal language, the new commandment of the new covenant, the covenant that is being established this night. And this covenantal language is really quite simple. It's not been reduced to this commandment, but this commandment forms the basis and the goal of all that the disciples are going to be about in relation to each other. Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, that you agape, or that you love one another. Jesus is not talking about feeling good about each other and lovey-dovey, let's hug and kiss each other when we get to church and do all that nonsense. He's not talking about that. He's just given them an example, and he's going to remind them, just as I have loved you. And that's with explicit reference to this act of humiliation that's tied into all this baptismal imagery that has to do with the crucifixion and forgiveness. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. This is no different language than how often shall I forgive each other? 7 times? No, 70 times 7. Ace telos, to the end. All that it takes. Now, when the disciples are acting this way with each other, when they're forgiving each other all the time, in this act of foot washing, we could call it moral foot washing, as it were, then Jesus says, everyone will know that you're my disciples If you have this kind of love for each other, everyone will know you're my disciples. Yeah, you're thinking the same thing I am. We have a problem with Christianity because this is not how disciples look. Now listen, as much as I am a part of liberal values, because that's just the way I was raised, I want to say here that love one another does not mean what political programs. It does not mean social programs. It has nothing to do with, protesting and changing the structures of society and all of that. No, 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 no. This love is very concrete and very specific to the act that has just been done. What is love? Just as I have loved you. How? Foot washing. What's that mean? Oh, it's with reference to baptism and consequent forgiveness of sins. And we see this, by the way, echoed in 1 John chapter 1, verses 7 through 9. The same kind of logic here. Just as I have loved you. Well, we do not have a Christianity today where Christians know much about forgiveness at all. Christians are locked into the blood of Abel. Christianity is really nothing more than the blood of Abel as a religion, which is why you can study it in schools along with other religions, because you're all studying the same thing. Sacrificial religion. All religion is sacrificial. It doesn't matter what it is, it is. And Christianity is just like it, but the gospel isn't. The gospel is utterly about being a different kind of victim, about bringing revelation and light into the world by the forgiving of those who hurt you. That's love. Love is forgiveness. Love is forgiveness. Love reestablishes the relationship by forgiving. Love isn't a mushy-gushy feeling. It's not something you can measure. It's something you do. So Peter all this, and instead he wants to know, where are you going, Lord? Where are you going? And Jesus answered, where I'm going, you can't follow me, but you'll follow afterward. And again, this theme is going to be picked up in chapter 21 when Peter wants to know about the beloved disciple and what's happening with him. And Jesus says, you come follow me and you'll experience what I've experienced. And Peter says, Lord, why can't I follow you down? I will lay down my life for you. And here we have Peter misunderstanding still yet and again, claiming to have the zeal that's necessary to fight the holy war. I will go to battle for you. I got your back. I'm in this with you. You're not alone. I've got my sword. We're good to go. I will die for you. Of course, Jesus knows this is against everything that he's been saying and teaching them and doing and wishing for them to understand, but they still don't get it. And so Jesus has to answer him with those bitter words that Helen Orchard pointed out. Will you lay down your life for me? Really? That's who you think that's who you are? You think you've understood yourself? I got news for you. Before the cock crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. It's another form of betrayal. Peter's indicating that Jesus is indicating Peter's going to do this. So we have Judas, who for all apparent purposes is zealous for Jesus, loves Jesus, right there, does everything Jesus wants. We've got Peter, Jesus' #1 main guy. Both whom carry swords. Judas is a Sicarii. Peter, we know, has the sword because he cuts off the servants, the temple priest servants here. They have failed to understand. So we should not be surprised that modern Christians fail to understand Jesus. And why modern Christians continue to justify violence at every turn. It's because they cannot help it. They are locked into their religion and they don't have the Holy Spirit. See, because Jesus is going to make a case, as we'll show in these next weeks, that those who possess the Holy Spirit are like him. And it's precisely this problem of Judas's and Peter's understanding of who he is and who the Father is in him that creates all the tension of the evening. And it's only after this, now, after Jesus has sent Judas away, and after he has cut Peter at the knees, bam, right there, boom, that he's going to move into the heart of the discourse. So we don't want to think of this Last Supper in some Leonardo da Vinci terms. We rather need to think of it as an episode out of The Sopranos. It's dark. There's emotions running high. There's betrayal about to happen. There's all kinds of false promises and misunderstandings abounding. And there's going to be a shocking act by the Lord Jesus. The act that basically says, as I've forgiven you, so you forgive one another. As I have washed your feet, so you wash each other's feet. I've forgiven you. You've been baptized. God forgives you. But you need to forgive each other and wash each other's feet. There is the only solution to violence is forgiveness. Absolute and unconditional, unequivocal forgiveness. End of story. That's just how it works. And so we come through this entire A section, as Peter Ellis calls it, and we have now a setup for all the stuff that's going to happen in and around the cross, with the Paraclete sayings and Jesus going to the Father and where that's all happening. And the next time we gather together, we'll look at chapter 14. Until then, I wish you a great week. Cheers.